it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen.
Beyond the 4 dimensions that man is aware of, there lies a mysterious fifth. It is a realm that is as big in size as the universe itself and as timeless as eternity. It rests between the depths of man's worries and the pinnacle of his knowledge, and is the nexus between light and gloom, science and superstition. Midnight Motel by Colt 10011. The summer night made everything stick. Sweat, clothes, blood. Oof, so much blood. His hulking shoulders slumped. The serial killer, or just plain Mr. Serial, breathed heavily as he skulked through the desert. It had been a long night of mass murder. He smelled of entrails and effluvia and things fouler still. Even through his mask, which had been carved into the image of a grinning skull, he could smell everything. Him, them, the family dog. Everything. He needed a shower. He'd put the emptiness of the New Mexico desert behind him when a flashing neon light caught his attention. Mr. Serial lifted his weary head and squinted through the moisture-fogged holes of his mask to see a sign. Midnight Motel. Vacancies available. The notion of a cold shower and a warm bed hurried his steps. He'd earned a good night's rest. Mr. Serial hurried across the vacant parking lot and entered the motel through the front door. The hinges reminded him of squealing mice as the door closed shut behind him. Behind the reception desk sat a girl with short black hair that was shaved too short on one side. Her eyes glued to the phone, the receptionist did not notice the large man walking toward her. Mr. Serial casually placed the machete he'd used to eviscerate his victims on the counter, breathing heavily. When the receptionist looked up, there wasn't the slightest hint of fear. In fact, she looked bored out of her mind. "Can I help you?" Mr. Serial looked down at his blood-splattered orange jumpsuit as if it were obvious. "Oh, so you want a room? I can help you with that." Her voice was deadpan. She was pale, alabaster. She probably didn't get out much, but who was he to judge? The receptionist reached behind her seat to the rear wall where she removed a key. "Sign in, please." Mr. Serial did as he was asked. He noticed half a dozen names on the sign-in sheet, so he wasn't the sole patron. This place was in the middle of nowhere. Highly unlikely it would be filled to capacity. He didn't think of it much. Gripping the pen with dirt-caked fingers, he signed and graciously took the key. "Oh, you'll have to leave that here," she said, motioning to his machete. "House rules, no weapons allowed." Mr. Serial glanced at his machete. It was a hefty price to pay for a good night's sleep, and he knew the rules. Sighing, he left his most prized possession with the receptionist and made for the exit. His room was on the second level, and he begrudgingly worked his way up the stairs, his knees protesting with each step. Once he reached the top, he noticed light coming from 2 other rooms further down. One patron was reclining on a beach chair outside his room. Mr. Serial glanced at him as he walked past. Even reclining, the patron was long, very long, almost slender. His body was elongated as if his arms and legs had been stretched like a doll in the hands of some sadistic child. His face was featureless, as if an animator had forgotten to draw his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth on his character. Most striking of all, and most odd in Mr. Serial's opinion, was his choice of attire. The man, Mr. Slender, wore a business suit and tie, hardly sensible in this climate. To each his own, Mr. Serial thought. Mr. Slender was reading a book as Mr. Serial approached. How he did so with no eyes was anyone's guess. Catching his eye, Mr. Slender offered him a curt nod. Mr. Serial returned a wave, and Mr. Slender returned to his reading. 2 doors down, Mr. Serial sighed and inserted the key. After a moment's fidgeting, he managed to open the door and stepped inside, shutting it behind him. In total darkness, Mr. Serial took solace in the silence. He turned on the light to see a simply furnished room with a bed, night table, cabinet, and TV. Simple, but he wasn't expecting much. He wasted no time peeling off his jumpsuit and making for the bathroom, where he promptly showered, washing the night's carnage away. As the water seeped over his head, neck, and back, Mr. Serial never did take off his mask, as if that would be breaking the rules somehow. He emerged from the shower and put on a bathrobe before making his way to bed. The large man turned on the television and sat there a moment to watch the news. Well, he knew it was too early for the authorities to find his handiwork out in the desert, so he flipped through the channels for a while. In time, he left to pick up some ice. The night air felt refreshing, and he stood a moment to take it in. Mr. Slander was still reading and paused a moment to offer Mr. Serial a sideways glance before going back to his book. Mr. Serial paid him no mind and went looking for the ice machine downstairs. There was no ice. How could there be no ice? It's fucking summer in the middle of the desert, and the motel has no ice. Mr. Serial was left pondering this and several other less flattering questions as he stood before the empty ice machine, ice bucket in hand. He scratched himself something fierce before glancing around. After a moment, he blew out a long-winded sigh. Oh, he'd hoped for a simple night. A woman was walking toward him out of the darkness of the hall. She was shorter than him, with gangly legs and arms, but her most striking feature were the drapes of night-black hair that covered most of her body. Her feet were bare. Long, yellow nails clicked loudly along the floor. She paused beside Mr. Serial, staring at the defunct ice machine. Her features were hidden behind wormy, black tendrils that she called her hair, which Mr. Serial noticed was soaking wet. A strange gargling sound escaped her hidden mouth. Her head tilted to one side as she studied the machine. Glancing down, Mr. Serial noticed the woman, whom he named Mrs. Wraith, was holding an ice bucket too. She noticed him noticing her and looked away. They both stared at the ice machine for a moment. Ms. Wraith then leaned to the side, reached down and plugged the cord in. The ice machine whirred to life and she stepped back. Ms. Wraith turned back to Mr. Serial and shrugged her tiny shoulders. They stayed that way for some time, waiting for the ice, which was presumably watery at the moment, to harden for their collection. A small cough drew their attention behind where they spotted a small, mean-looking doll with red hair and soulless blue eyes, wearing nothing but a pair of red boxers and slippers. This patron, the doll man, was holding an ice bucket of his own. The doll man looked up at them, raising his bucket as if in supplication. Mr. Serial sighed. After finally getting some ice, Mr. Serial returned to his room. He sighed as he sat down, his large frame sinking into the mattress with a creak. The TV showed a salesman spouting the wonders of this latest product. Mr. Serial spotted the remote and reached for it, only to have it drop to the floor. He sighed. Exerting his tired frame off the mattress took some effort, but he managed to get up and bend on shaky knees and reach down. No sooner did his sausage-like fingers graze the item when a small hand pulled it under the bed. Blinking behind his mask, Mr. Serial leaned down and spotted a tiny creature with large yellow eyes and even larger ears nibbling on the remote voraciously. The creature hissed as Mr. Serial reached in to retrieve the item and retreated deeper under the bed. Mr. Serial leaned in as far as he could, his shoulder bumping into the bed frame. As he stretched, he moved the bed, lifting the mattress. The creature growled and snapped at his hands, and it bit several times, which made Mr. Serial try all the harder. Finally, it ran out to the other end and towards the bathroom, and Mr. Serial gave chase. He found the creature, which had scaly green skin that looked slimy to the touch, standing atop the toilet seat. His long ears flapping wildly, this little monster waved the remote menacingly over the edge as if to tease him. Or it was just being a dick. Mr. Serial watched the remote drop into the toilet, the creature flushing it down, laughed manically as it leapt in itself. Mr. Serial looked into the toilet just in time to see it flip him off as its hand disappeared down the shaft. Yeah, definitely a dick. Outside, the salesman was touting another product that would change your life. After the remote fiasco, Mr. Serial decided it was time to cool off. Put on a pair of swim trunks, his body covered in scars, picked up a towel and closed the door. Mr. Slender was fast asleep in his lawn chair, the book plastered over his snoring face. Mr. Serial watched him for a moment, wondering why he hadn't just retired to his room, shrugged, and went downstairs. Mr. Serial had the pool all to himself. After picking a lawn chair to drop his towel on, he walked over to the diving board. Taking tenuous steps, Mr. Serial just stood at the edge, watching his reflection in the water. He clapped his hands together as if to signal the start of a race, then spread his arms like an eagle about to take flight. Before he could jump in, however, he heard someone whispering to get his attention. Psst. He hadn't noticed it, but the pool was not as deserted as previously thought. A man clad entirely in black, wearing a ghost face mask, was reclining in the darkened corner of the pool, almost invisible due to his attire. He'd been listening to music on his iPhone and drew Mr. Serial's attention to the nearby sign that read, "No diving after 6 p.m. Thank you, management." Sighing, Mr. Serial abandoned the diving board and made his way over to the other end of the pool. There, a small flight of stairs allowed for a much subtler entry into the water. Wide ripples accompanied his movements as he waddled his massive frame into the pool. Mr. Ghost returned to listening to his tunes, gently tapping his foot in the air. Mr. Serial wadded into the middle of the pool and just stood there. He could feel his sore muscles begin to relax. Hours of hacking innocent college teens was exhausting work, and tonight had been particularly trying on the man's physique. The night was quiet save for the sound of upbeat K-pop songs ringing in the air. Mr. Serial glanced over at Mr. Ghost, who seemed oblivious to the world around him. If he was so into his music, would he have heard Mr. Serial splash if he'd used the diving board? Was Mr. Ghost just a stickler for the rules? Whatever. Mr. Serial dipped his head underwater and stayed there, taking solace in the utter lack of sound. His breath bubbled up to the surface, reminding him of the girl he'd drowned in the lake not 10 miles from here. She struggled something fierce, and he wondered, however briefly, if she'd suffered in the end. Some said drowning was a peaceful way to go, and in that moment, his body limp in the water, he felt he could just go to sleep and not wake up. The water was strangely warm. Opening his eyes, Mr. Serial saw a blurry figure standing above him. Its face was distorted, but he swore he recognized a pair of large yellow eyes staring back at him. And he stood up, water cascading down his broad shoulders, only to see the same little beast from his room standing at the edge of the pool, relieving himself. Mr. Serial glanced at the stream as the liquid pooled around him. For such a small animal, the creature must have been full to bursting. 2 minutes later, the creature shook itself off and chuckled manically at Mr. Serial as it ran off, its chortles filling the air. Mr. Serial glanced over at Mr. Ghost, who was now humming along to the lyrics to the music. Mr. Serial's eyes gradually looked towards the no diving sign, only to see another one right beside it. "Please, no urinating in the pool. It's rude to the other guests. Thank you, management." He turned in the direction the strange thing had fled, the urine somehow filling the surface of the pool, and a disturbing thought came to his head. The creature hadn't washed its hands. Unable to enjoy the pool, Mr. Serial headed back to his room, only to find that the key didn't work. Groaning, he looked up at the sky and wondered what god he pissed off to warrant such a night. And then he remembered. Oh yeah, the killing thing. He tried and tried again, and fidgeting with the key until it broke. On his way to the front desk, Mr. Serial passed Mr. Slender again. He was snoring away without a care in the world. Mr. Serial dragged himself back to the front desk, where the receptionist had not moved from her seat. Still glued to her phone, eyes dotting back and forth, she didn't notice him until Mr. Serial slammed the broken key down on the counter. The receptionist didn't so much as flinch, though she did look up, annoyed. Yeah? One would think the broken key would be enough to indicate what the issue was. He looked down at the counter. You broke the key. Her frustration apparent, she took the item before muttering, some idiot always breaks the key. Mr. Serial blinked. The receptionist reached for another key behind her. That's coming out of your bill. I can give you the next room over. You'll have to sleep there for the night and pick up your stuff in the morning. That's when our repair guy will be in. She placed the key on the counter. Anything else? Mr. Serial took the key, then remembered the strange monster peeing in the pool. He did his best to convey that image, imitating the creature as best he could, even conveying what a man pissing would look like in front of her. Don't be a pervert, she said, before going back to her phone. Realizing this wasn't going anywhere, Mr. Serial gave up and took the key. The night air was cool, a pleasant respite from the daylight hours. Taking a moment, he eventually wound his way past the ice machine, where a clown in blood-stained attire stood with an empty ice bucket. Pausing, Mr. Serial noticed that the light wasn't on again. The clown looked at him. His mopey face indicated he wasn't very happy. Mr. Serial leaned over and plugged in the cord he knew was there from the last time. The ice machine started up again. The clown looked at him and smiled, revealing rows and rows of razor-sharp teeth. Moments later, Mr. Serial opened the door to his new bedroom while holding a red balloon the clown had given him. It was the same as the last one, just one room over. He let the balloon fly to the ceiling and closed the door, making his way to the bathroom. He took another shower and pulled on the new bathrobe, which was slightly smaller than the last one. Unable to do anything about that, Mr. Serial sat down and promptly turned on the TV. He glanced sideways at the ice bucket, thought better of it, and put his feet up. After a few moments, he heard a ruckus coming from the room next to him. It sounded like two people in a heated argument, one that gradually increased in tempo. Sighing, Mr. Serial banged the wall to let them know someone was trying to sleep, which they seemed to ignore. The wall shook as something heavy hit it. It was followed by a loud crash and even more screaming. Finally having enough, Mr. Serial reached over to call the front desk, then thought better of it. Unless he could sign his complaint, the girl, who was less than enthusiastic about her work anyway, wasn't going to do anything about the noisy neighbors, so he had to take matters into his own hands. Leaving, he walked to the next room over and knocked on the door loud enough to get their attention. After a moment, a woman wearing a nun outfit opened the door. The sister was almost as tall as him, with a long face covered in blue-black lines. Her yellow eyes glanced him up and down, head cocking to one side as if to say, "Can I help you?" Well, Mr. Serial tried to convey his grievances using wild hand gestures and grunts. When he looked over her shoulder, he noticed a man dressed all in black tied to the bedpost. His mouth was sewn shut and he had long black hair. Despite having his mouth sewn shut, the man had a strap over it too. It was then Mr. Serial noticed all the S&M items strewn around the floor. Realizing what he'd just walked into, Mr. Serial took an embarrassed step back. He dipped his head in apology and raised his hand and gently brought his thumb and forefinger in a gesture that said, "Can you please keep it down?" The sister, whip in hand, understood his gesture and shrugged as if to say, "We'll try." And then she closed the door. What a night, Mr. Serial thought. Back in his room, Mr. Serial lied down in bed with the TV on, doing his best to ignore the strange sounds coming in from the room next door. He had the volume up high enough to block out most of the sounds. Didn't care much if it bothered the couple because, hell, they weren't taking him into consideration, so why should he? The movie he was watching was, of all things, a horror movie. The murderer had just slashed the boy's neck open while he and his girlfriend had stopped at a gas station. The girl, screaming her head off, as if that ever did anything, was running for her life. She turned and headed into the forest while the killer casually followed. In time she fell because, of course, she fell, and cried her eyes out as the killer slowly caught up to her. She begged for her life, kept screaming and dragging herself across the soil. Mr. Serial was bored. He shook his head. The creature shook its head too. The little monster was sitting beside Mr. Serial with its legs dangling over the edge. Well, once Mr. Serial noticed it, he grabbed for it, but it was too fast. The creature hopped off the bed, cackling madly as it began to jump around the room, knocking things over. Mr. Serial gave chase. In time, there came a knocking from the room next door, as if he was the one being inconsiderate. The creature was too fast, too nimble. It was like a rubber ball bouncing all over the place. It even knocked one of the ceiling lamps out with its antics. The phone rang and Mr. Serial picked it up. "Hello?" came the bored voice of the receptionist. "This is the front desk. We've been getting complaints about too much noise. Can you keep it down or you're out of here or something?" Mr. Serial grunted in response, attempting to convey his concerns about his unwanted guest. "Sir, they prefer the term aesthetically challenged," she said in the creature's defense. "We don't appreciate labels at this establishment. That patron paid for a room same as you, and he deserves the same respect as everyone else." Well, Mr. Serial grunted again. "Sir, there was a second remote in the drawer beneath the TV. Our patrons are free to borrow whatever device they need during their stay." Another grunt. "Of course he urinated in the pool. Everyone urinates in the pool. I urinate in the pool." Mr. Serial raised his voice. "And stop chasing him. You're 10 times his size. Poor thing must be scared stiff." His shoulders slumping, Mr. Serial collapsed on the bed, the aesthetically challenged creature doing a jig on the table. The receptionist went on. "Honestly, you're making me very uncomfortable with these accusations. I'm going to hang up now. Please keep it down. Well, have a good evening." There was a click on the other end. Mr. Serial glanced at his house guest. The creature continued to dance. It was going to be a long night. The morning came. Mr. Serial barely slept that evening. In fact, didn't sleep at all. Red, bloodshot eyes poked from behind his mask as the creature snored peacefully in the ruined fabric of his pillow. The damn thing's path of gluttonous destruction could be seen throughout the room. Everything was damaged, shredded, torn, or broken into several pieces. It had gotten so the creature had tuckered itself out and fell into a dreamless sleep while Mr. Serial, exhausted beyond reason, just lay flat on the floor, spread eagle. When it came time to leave, Mr. Serial dragged his weary body out of the room and spotted Mr. Slender still in his lawn chair. Hearing him approach, Mr. Slender woke up, yawned, and stretched his spindly limbs until his muscles cracked. Seeing Mr. Serial just standing there like he was about to tip over, Mr. Slender asked, "Morning, neighbor. Sleep well?" Mr. Serial punched Mr. Slender so hard he knocked him out, sending Mr. Slender back to dreamland. Turning to his old room, Mr. Serial saw a sign that read, "Door jammed. Guy won't be in till 7 p.m. Please see front desk or whatever. Management." Mr. Serial groaned like an injured bear, slamming his head into the door in anger. As he slogged his way downstairs, he spotted the doll man and the clown leaving the front office with their luggage in tow, both appearing well rested. Mr. Serial opened the door and found the receptionist with her legs on the desk, eyes still glued to her phone. She looked up as he approached. "Man, you look like shit." Mr. Serial said nothing. "Checking out?" Still nothing. "So, I'm guessing you saw the sign." Mr. Serial felt his fists trembling. "Well, nothing I can do about that," she said as she reached for the guest book. "Called the guy who fixes doors, and he didn't pick up all night. Anyway, you can extend your stay until he gets here, or we can have your stuff mailed to you. Service fees apply, as do shipping charges." Well, did you enjoy your stay at the Midnight Motel? Well, he clenched his fists so hard they started to bleed. Oof, that bad? In any case, we thank you for choosing our establishment. Not like you have a lot of choices. Please remember to sign out and, reaching down, she pulled out an object. Here's your knife thingy back. We even had it cleaned for you. Charges have been applied to your room. With great reservation, Mr. Serial signed out, grabbed his machete and turned to leave, using every ounce of willpower he had not to decapitate the receptionist. Opening the door, he stopped when he saw the creature, orange this time, standing there about to knock. He looked up at Mr. Serial with hazy eyes. Smiling, the little monster waved. Well, that was all he could take. Mr. Serial brought up his foot and slammed it down on the creature, killing it instantly. Feeling good for the first time that night, Mr. Serial let out a contented sigh. "Hey!" the receptionist rushed past him. "That's the repair guy. Probably out drinking all night. Well, he was an asshole, but now we have no one who can fix the door you jammed up. Thanks a lot, pal. Now I gotta look for a new guy and do interviews. My entire weekend is shot. You're a real piece of work, you know that? You..." Not long after, Mr. Serial opened the door to his odd room by using Mr. Slender's head as a battering ram. He dropped the now comatose killer to the floor and walked in. He was covered in blood and couldn't care less. Making his way to the bed, he slumped down and watched TV, putting his bloody machete to the side. Mr. Serial felt himself relaxing for the first time. The news report was on. Confirmed 11 bodies found in the desert, all hacked to pieces. Authorities are horrified by this carnage and a manhunt is on for the killer. Please advise all citizens to stay home until the perpetrator is in custody. We'll keep you updated of the latest updates as we receive them. Moments later, Mr. Serial was snoring. Outside, a small green creature was urinating in the pool again. Okay, so that was quite a lot different from the stuff I would usually do. I just thought it was a lot of fun, interesting idea, and why not have a bit of comedy horror for a change? Anyway, so thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video about that story? I'll do my best as ever to join the conversation. And that was, of course, another one from Dr. Creepen's subreddit, one that I set up so you could share your stories with me and I could read them all for you. Some wonderful stories in there at the moment, and always brings me great pleasure to bring to life something that you've written. So if you've got anything, please do it there. Can't guarantee I read everything, but I do my best to read my fair share from the ones that are shared directly with me. So very much appreciated. Well, that is enough for this Monday evening. Thanks for all the kind comments about the new car. Hopefully that's all going to be fine. Wait and see. But yeah, okay, so that was Monday. Back again on Wednesday. Something longer, I think, on Wednesday. So until then, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.